talk I originally gave appropriate in my mind on Indigenous Peoples Day in 2025. It's appropriate because tonight we'll be talking about the homeland of Maria Sabina, an indigenous person from whom the rest of the world learned about Celesti mushrooms. So with that, we'll go ahead and get the ball rolling, all right? The plan for this talk is we're going to be talking about a trip that we took to Oaxaca, Mexico, to visit the mushroom people of Oaxaca, a tour that was sponsored by NAMA. And the focus of this talk will be on the study of indigenous peoples' culture of Celesti mushrooms there and the impact that R Gordon Wasson's visits there in the 1950s had on Maria Sabina and the indigenous people of Oaxaca that continues to reverberate in not a good way today. So I'll kind of go quickly and hopefully reserve time for questions and discussion after. Now this trip took, as I said, took place in August of 2025, and it's in the North Sierra Mountains, Oaxaca, the home of Maria Sabina, who introduced the non-indigenous world to Celesti mushrooms, and the trip really affected me quite deeply. I was telling Brandon about it earlier. I think you might see why as we get into this. First, the requisite disclaimers. The views expressed in this talk are mine and mine alone. The information being presented here is for informational use only. And CIMA, as an Idaho nonprofit, recognizes that Celesti mushroom use mushrooms are illegal in Idaho, and they carry significant penalties and potential jail time. So the views expressed are mine are not meant to represent those of CIMA as a group. And with that as a disclaimer, we'll move on to the mushroom people of Oaxaca. As I mentioned, this talk was sponsored by NAMA, the North American Mythological Association, which is the sponsoring organization for all of the mushroom clubs in North America. We flew to central Mexico, Mexico City, and then to Oaxaca City, which is about an hour and a half flight from Mexico City. And from Oaxaca City, then we traveled by van to Ixtlan, which is about an hour and a half north of Oaxaca City. Now, Ixtlan is a community of about 8,000 people. There are 12 different groups or tribes of people, for lack of a better term. They speak at least 16 different languages, of which there are many different dialects. It's a very complex culture and Asian, but many of these tribes or groups of people have histories of mushroom use. I would clarify that of Celesti mushroom use, but not all do, and we'll hop into that in a little bit. But Ixtlan's in the Sierra is about 50 miles from Maria Sabina's home in Oaxaca. Now this is a view of the community of Ixtlan as seen from a restaurant overlooking the town. That's a glass walkway beneath which there's about 1,000-foot drop. And I challenge anybody to try and walk on that glass walkway without holding the rail. I thought I could. There's no earthly way I could do it. But you can see the little community there, and then we stayed in an ecotourism center that's run by this community that I believe is north of there a bit. Now these forests in Ixtlan are managed by these autonomous communities autonomously. That is to say, they operate without the Mexican government's involvement, interference, or whatever, and for that reason, this area is something of a hotbed of political unrest periodically, because the Mexican government sometimes doesn't like that. But at any rate, this area that we were in, they have about 15 cabins, they have about 45, 50 people capacity. All right. And then we did the usual foraging thing. We went out and collect mushrooms for identification. The most interesting ones of which were collected and sent this time to a Mexican fungarium, an improvement on previous years when they had been sent to a fungarium in the U.S. Now, this is a picture of foraging in a cloud forest there, and honest to goodness, it looks like something out of the movie Avatar. It's so beautiful in just an otherworldly way. These lands are held as sacred by the indigenous people who take care of them, and we were warned not to take anything from this forest, not even a rock. And having been there, I kind of understand it. It's special. It's special. It's space. It's absolutely beautiful. It's cared for and maintained by the locals down in this Eastland community. This is a cave that is about a 10-minute walk from the lecture center in which the talks and mushroom identification was held. Again, just really quite beautiful. At the end of the week, the local community of indigenous peoples were invited in to see what we collected. Brooke Reed, who we had out here recently, might be watching out, I don't know, but Brooke was really tickled that some of these people wanted to establish contacts with NAMA, and his hope is to establish chapters in Mexico and potentially in some of these indigenous communities where the use of mushrooms is a very important part of their life. The guy in the white T-shirt at the top there is Dr. Felipe Ruan Soto. He's a PhD mycologist from Chiapas and going through the mushrooms that we collected. And this stat on the screen is just astounding to me. These people through I think the work of Dr. Mara, I'm going to mess up her last name, but Mara has, I believe, documented the use of 202 different species of mushrooms in these communities. So, to me, that's just astounding, because I don't think I know about mushrooms, but they now eat and use 200 others for food and medicines and who knows, dyes or whatever. Our lead guide, Celestinos, here is a local, self-taught world-class expert on orchids. He came from a Cybertech family, speaks English and Spanish pretty flawlessly, and he was chosen by these 12 communities to be their ecotourism spokesperson and the interface between those communities and the outside world. They had a number of the locals there who served as guides and went on so into forays with this stuff. And I was really astounded at the breadth and depth of these people's knowledge. They really know and love their forests. They really know their land, and it's inspiring. Not all of them are experts in the same things, but they all know their land at an astounding level. The governance of these communities, to me, was really interesting. Evidently, in order to observe any kind of extractive process, be it mining or cutting timber or anything that's tinged out of the forest, they have to have unanimous consent among the 12 communities. And you can't get 12 people to agree to anything, much less 12 communities, for which reason no extractive processes have been approved, which means that these forests and this land that they manage are absolutely pristine. They really care for beautiful. Every evening, as I alluded to, there were lectures by this Mexican mycologist. The third from the left is Dr. Mara in the green hoodie. Dr. Felipe Ruan Soto is next to him, and it was wonderful to have Mexican mycologists participating in this event. The people making it happen is organized by Zach Hunter, an American living in Oaxaca for more than 3 years, 4 now. I think he's moved to Chiapas, but there's a collection of about 6 Mexican mycologists, and a number of the participating mycologists and/or people in discussions came from or worked in the local indigenous communities around Ixtlan. Mushrooms of all sorts are really a vital part of local cuisine and culture, a very ancient part of their work. I also point out that the number of mycologists and people interested in mushrooms coming from this community of 8,000 people impressed me with the importance of how important is mushroom to arts of the local cultures there? It is a big deal. Now, Dr. Mar Haraluna lives with these tribes and studies the use of the mushrooms with a particular focus, not explicit, but a particular focus on Solosky mushrooms. This is a picture, it's not really showing very clearly, but you can see in the on the screen there's a map of Mexico, and those little yellow dots, those are meant to represent where Solosky mushrooms have been found in Mexico. Up top, it's hard to read the number. It says 144 species of Solosky mushrooms, 55 in Mexico. That number now is up to 165 species, and about 55 species have been found in Mexico. These mushrooms are found in Oaxaca and Veracruz and Jalisco states, but Oaxaca is a particular hotspot with about 27 different species of Solosky mushrooms that have been identified there. Now, the locations of where they've been identified actually correspond to the areas where this Dr. Gaston Guzman worked. He was credited with identifying and classifying between 60 and 70 species of Solosky mushrooms worldwide, some as far away as Papua New Guinea and New Zealand. We had the great pleasure of meeting his daughter a couple of years ago, a Telluride, who's continuing this work now at a molecular level, really, but now that his work goes on. Now, Mara, who lives with the studies of mushrooms mushroom used by these indigenous peoples, was kind enough to review these slides before presentation because, as you'll see as we get into it, I wanted to be really careful that I treated this community with respect. And I asked her to make some comment about it, and this was her comment. I will preface it by saying velada is the term that they use for a candlelit ceremony, mushroom ceremony. Traditionally, it's held at night and in the dark with only the candle as the light. Vela is candle in Spanish. Presenting veladas as experiences that can be attended or replicated by outsiders can unintentionally support spiritual extractivism and a long history of harm caused by psychedelic tourism. See a little bit of that later. It is better to emphasize that these ceremonies are relational, family, and context-based, and not available as general cultural experiences, which I think is kind of how it's maybe presented often to the community outside of this that is there. So the thing that really struck me in hearing Mara talk about this research was that the betrayal of R Gordon Wasson, his betrayal of Maria Sabina in the 1950s continues to pop researchers like Mara today. And to me, this is where it gets really interesting. But let's talk about Maria Sabina because that's where this story sort of begins. Maria Sabina, for those of you who may not be familiar with her, they called her Sabina, a wise woman, Ongera. She was a fourth generation mushroom, we would call a shaman, who was responsible for introducing the West to Solosky mushrooms. Now, she worked with R Gordon Wasson, an American banker and amateur mycologist who brought the story of these mushrooms to the West. Maria Sabina was born in Lago de Jimenez, several hours north of Oaxaca City, an area known for both its isolation and biodiversity. It's in the epicenter of biodiversity for all of Mexico. And it is rugged country. To get to Huautla from Ixtlan would take you another 6 or 8 hours, only about 50 miles, but it is brutally rugged country. This is mountain, bad mountain ways. She was born on July 22nd, 1894 in the mountains of Sierra Mazatlán, and her life was tragic. She was born into a family of mushroom curanderos. Her father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were also all mushroom curandero. Curandero is a healer who healed by means of using the Solosky mushrooms. Her father died when she was 3, and she was raised in extreme poverty by her maternal grandparents. Turns out she had her first experience with these mushrooms that she called Niños Santos, or holy children, at some point between the ages of 5 and 8. Interestingly, in her first experience, Maria Sabina heard what she described as an otherworldly voice, telling her about some herbs that would cure her uncle who was ill at the time. The voice told her where to find them, and she went, collected the herbs, gave them to her uncle, and he got better. It's the beginning of many such sorts of experiences. This began a spiritual journey for her, and she began to feel that she was called to guide others to healing through these mushrooms. She began to feel she was a conduit for divine wisdom during these veladas of mushrooms, and she felt that the mushrooms spoke through her. At the end of this stop, I'll read one of her poems. At the ends of many of the phrases, she uses the word says, and what she was saying in that poem is, this is the mushroom, what the mushroom is saying through her. She was married at 14, her first husband died when she was 20, and when he died, she fell into grief and depression so severe that she began terribly ill. Nobody in the community knew how to heal her, cure her, so she turned to her Niños Santos, or holy children. And on this journey, the mushrooms revealed to her that her purpose in life was to help people heal with these, her holy children, the psilocybin-containing mushrooms. This is a book we picked up in Oaxaca that tells of the hardships, the hunger, the difficulty of being the sole provider for her family after the loss of her husband. But she had a hard life. Though she recovered from her grief after her treatment with the Niños Santos, she had difficulty feeding her 3 children and her mother by herself. This is a sustenance farmer, and she felt she had to remarry, so she remarried a violent and unfaithful man, Marcial Carrera, bore him 6 more children, all of whom died or were murdered, except for one daughter, Aurora. Her husband, Marcial, was reputed in the community to be a brujos, or a witch, a sorcerer, and a man feared in the Mazatec community. Clearly, from my read, just a bad man. It was about this time that her sister then became gravely ill, and again the local healers tried what they couldn't help, and the local healers told her that her sister was going to die. They couldn't do anything more. So Maria held a velada mushroom ceremony for her sister, and she was cured. It was at that point that she became more widely known within the community for her ability to heal with these mushrooms, and many people in the community turned to her for that. Her second husband, Marcial, became jealous of all the attention she was getting from the community and decided to get back at her by having multiple affairs in a small Mexican village. Not a really good idea, and was murdered by the son of one of her lovers. So once again, she was widowed. Into this scene comes R Gordon Wasson, August 5th through 17th, 1953. He was vice president of public relations of J.P. Morgan Investments, an amateur mycologist interested in the, quote, mushroom cult of Mexico, to which he was referred by author Robert Graves, the author of I, Claudius and a bunch of other books. It was actually Robert Graves who suggested that R. Gordon Wasson go visit Wildly. And that's where he went in August of 1953. Interestingly, J.P. Morgan, who founded the banking investment firm that we all have heard of now, studied mycology at Harvard before he founded his investment funds. Okay, well, Wasson on his first trip couldn't find the mushrooms, and he couldn't get any participation by any of the locals. The locals told him that this subject was booked very thoroughly. You have to bear in mind this is sacred to these people. They didn't know this guy from Adam. He managed to pay his translator's brother $14 for some mushrooms that he then sent to Roger Hyman France, and to have them identified. I will probably mess up the pronunciation, but this psilocybin soreliescens or something like that, Psilocybe cubensis, Psilocybe mexicana, and then this Psilocybe siliginioides, I think it is. So rare mushroom, interestingly, has still never been chemically analyzed. It's presumed to contain psilocybin and psilocin because it is used ceremonially by the indigenous people there, but
Is any? Yeah. Do you think he can
how do we kill the party on the back? But I'm just going to keep going. All right. Yeah. The eyeball mushroom, the silicinioides, is used by the Mazatecs and others in the area for ritual purposes as for healing spiritual rituals, emotional catharsis. Aztecs and Nahua people are also reported to have utilized them. Like I said, these mushrooms were sent to mycologist Roger Heim, and remarkably, he was able to cultivate Psilocybe mexicana from some of these samples. He took mushrooms and grew them on some dung from exotic animals in the local zoo. He was able to grow about 100 grams of dried mushrooms and sent them to Albert Hoffman in Switzerland at Sandoz to analyze chemically. Wasson then went back to Oaxaca again in 1955, this time with photographer Alan Richardson. Reached to Oaxaca on Wednesday, June 29, 1955, and when walking across the ravine, he spotted a pile of landslide mushrooms, Psilocybe mushrooms growing there, and collected them. He then went to what the fellow who was kind of de facto the town mayor, Cayetano Garcia, and asked him to recommend someone to administer the mushrooms to him. Garcia recommended a first-class quintet woman without stain. He recommended Maria Sabina. You can look at her face. This is when, much later in her life, you can see the suffering in this woman's face. She went through a lot, but we'll see more as we go. Well, Maria Sabina didn't want to do it. This is sacred ground for her people, and it was forbidden to reveal this to outsiders. But Garcia, the essential mayor of the town, leaned heavily on her to perform the ceremony, and she said afterwards that she felt compelled to do so. I'd also add that this expedition was in part surreptitiously funded by the U.S. CIA as part of its MK Ultra program looking for, quote, mind control drugs. And again, Maria Sabina stated in later interviews she felt compelled to accept his visit and to comply with his wishes because she was under such pressure from those who accompanied R Gordon Wasson. Again, my guess is that the CIA leaned on the town mayor who leaned on Maria Sabina, but Wasson offered Cayetano Garcia and his wife $10 for the introduction, but they refused. They said, "We do not do this for money." Maria Sabina complied, went through the ceremony, ate 13 pears, 26 mushrooms, or about 8 grams dried. She served 6 pears to Wasson and his companions. So she took about 8 grams, and Wasson probably a little less than 4 grams, but substantial doses. Wasson paid her a whopping $4, and as you'll see, ruined her life. Turns out that R Gordon Wasson chose this area in part because the Mazatecs, quote, did not know the value of money. And the fact that they did not know the value of money played a fundamental role in the fight for choosing this region as the center for his expeditions. On August 15th, 1955, Wasson contacted chemists, got them lined up to start working with drug companies to figure out what's in these mushrooms and turn them into a commercial product. He funded that work through an entity, a shell entity formed through the CIA Ultra program, again interested in, at the time, mind control drugs. And by the end of 1955, that research was already underway. So again, to me, there's no question that this whole expedition was extracted by design from the outset. Now, Maria Sabina, as I mentioned, did not want to do the ceremony. It was against everything in her culture to do so. But she agreed to do it under duress with firm conditions. This is sacred knowledge of her people and self-rebuke. Before proceeding, she insisted on these conditions. First, secrecy. Not revealing her identity, the village location, or publishing photos. Now, Wasson's traveling with a photographer, and he agreed, I'll keep it secret. I'm gonna take the photos, but for I'm use only, they're not to be published. Second, and in some ways maybe equally important, in Mazatec society, you needed to have a reason to do the ceremony. From his prior visits, Wasson knew that the Mazatecs used these mushrooms to locate missing people. So he lied to Maria Sabina and told her that his son was missing, and he desperately wanted to find her, and would she please help him find him. So you got to remember, R Gordon Wasson was a determined, arrogant, connected, wealthy man, and demonstrably a liar. She held the ceremony as a secret private event not to be shared to help Wasson find the son who was not missing. He then published the whole thing in Life magazine with enough detail that the people, it hurts the heart. They're able to figure out who she was, where the village was, and all of the details he promised to obscure were revealed in sufficient detail that people could figure it out. This is the article. You can see the photos, you can see the article. Maria Sabina didn't want photos taken, but Wasson assured her that only for his personal use, and so much for Wasson's word for secrecy, he published it all. That magazine got the attention of a couple of academics from Harvard. On the left is Dr. Timothy Leary. On the right is Richard Alpert. Later, better known as Ron Dawes. They went to Java, and they were soon followed by hordes of people. Keith Richards and Bob Dylan showed up and expected Maria Sabina to do their laundry by hand. Hippies of all sorts descended on Wildland, and Maria Sabina lamented that the foreigners were looking for God, but they brought the ruin of the holy children. She also felt that the mushrooms ceased speaking to her after the foreigners flocked to Wildland. Wasson later, openly revealing full identity and location, he published a book in 1957 called Mushrooms, Russia, and History, in which her precise identity and wildlife were explicitly described and identified. At that point, the surge of philosophy tourism became intolerable, and her community turned against her, blaming her for the chaos. The results for Maria Sabina were absolutely catastrophic. Her community, as I mentioned, turned on her. They burnt her house down in 1958. She was repeatedly attacked, was ostracized from the community, and isolated for the rest of her life. Her son was murdered. She was arrested by the Mexican police under false charges of selling marijuana. And then the rest of the world seemed to have forgotten her. Because in 1983, Mexican poet Homero Archis, I don't know how you say his name, but he's evidently a famous Mexican poet, impressed with Maria Sabina's poetry, decided to reach out and find her in 1983, only to find that she was dying of malnutrition. He meant to have her put in a hospital and taken care of, but she died at age 93, destitute, and died essentially from malnutrition, starvation. This is a 91-year-old subsistence farmer woman, no one to support her, ostracized by her community. And she said she died of hunger. This Maria Sabina quote of note is, quote, before Wasson, no one took the children, the holy children, simply to find God. They're always given to cure the sick. Notably, in 2024, when I first researched this, there were 134 psilocybin-related clinical trials, some funded by the National Institutes of Health, focusing on a broad array of illnesses or problems, ranging from depression, substance use disorder, addictions, cancer-related anxiety, existential stress, chronic pain, and interestingly, autism spectrum disorder. There are now, to my mind, fascinating reports in the incredible scientific literature, I think in Nature, detailing how effective psilocybin is as an anti-inflammatory agent, and there are studies with evidence that shows that it may be effective in life extension or longevity. They have cell culture studies in which human tissue grown in cell culture, those cells lived up to 57% longer after exposure to high doses of psilocybin. And I kind of wonder myself if there might be a reason Maria Sabina lived so long, despite these difficult conditions in which she found herself living. Also, the psilocybin derived from the mushrooms Maria Sabina was provided were given to Albert Hofmann, the Swiss chemist and the inventor of LSD. He isolated and synthesized the chemical compound in 1958. It has since been partialized into pharmaceuticals worth billions, yet neither Maria Sabina nor the Mazatec people have received a penny of compensation or even recognition from these industrial giants who set to profit greatly from it. So why is this story important to us? Well, because Maria Sabina was so betrayed by R Gordon Wasson, the people of the North Sierra Madres now have a very deep distrust of researchers. And now, knowing that people pay good money for psilocybin ceremonies, they want the researchers to pay them for information about their practices, and most disturbingly, Mara, who lives with these peoples and studies their communities and their ceremonial use of these mushrooms, told me that now these people will tell researchers whatever they want to hear. So you pay me the money and I will tell you what you want to hear. So they don't even trust the Mexican PhD mycologist who is embedded within their community and has their best interests at heart. Another thing that Mara told us is that after the ceremony with R Gordon Wasson, he arranged to have large quantities, at least 250 kilograms of these mushrooms, shipped out on a regular basis to researchers. Some of them he shipped dried, some of them he shipped fresh, and many of them evidently spoiled, but enough of them made it to Albert Hofmann to isolate and synthesize the component of psilocybin. So again, so much for treating these mushrooms as sacred. Nothing I read in scene about R Gordon Wasson's behavior here has done anything but maybe just took you more on this. After synthesizing psilocybin, Albert Hofmann and R Gordon Wasson traveled back to Oaxaca to give the chemical psilocybin to Maria Sabina on October 11, 1962. They gave her about 30 milligrams, or they gave her 30 milligrams, which would be about the equivalent of maybe 3 grams of the dried mushrooms, I guess. And Maria Sabina said that the tablets, quote, contained the spirit of the mushrooms. All right, well, the take-home message to me is that these mushrooms really find saviors to these people, and they have been since time immemorial. The indigenous people of Oaxaca still guard the secrets of their mushrooms and the mushroom use in assay, perhaps even more so now than in the 1950s. So I walked away from this experience thinking that it's unwise to believe pretty much anything you can read about the research in this area, because we probably know very little about the real cultural, medicinal, spiritual uses of these mushrooms. And I'd point out that if you think we really understand the indigenous mushroom use, then maybe you can explain the words in a poem I'm about to read to you. I would point out that this is a poem that Maria Sabina sang in the midst of a psilocybin experience. It was recorded, her words were in Mazatec, and R Gordon Wasson. One good thing he did, I guess, is he got the transcript translated, and that's why we have this poem. I also point out that Maria Sabina could neither read nor write. This is something coming with no educational framework whatsoever. Now, in this poem, I would point out that in her view, the words are the mushrooms, the words are the words the mushrooms sang through her. This is how she described it. Start songs. Because you gave me your clout. Because you gave me your thought. Because I am a clean woman. Because I am a cross-star woman. Because I am a woman who flies. I am the sacred beautiful woman who says mushrooms. I am the lordy woman who says. I am the lake who swims who says. Because I can swim in the abyss. Because I can swim in all forms. Because I am the lunchroom. Because I am the sacred opossum. Because I am the war opossum. I am the woman boat that is beneath the water, says. I am the woman with the poppies down, says. I am the shepherdess who is beneath the water, says. I am the woman who shepherds the amelts, says. I am a shepherdess, and I come with my sim shepherd, says. Because everything has its origin. Come, going cook place to place from the origin. The possum, the possum, I must explain, holds deep significance in Mazatec culture as a clever animal that they believe brought fire to them by stealing it from the gods, using these bare tails to carry the flame. This completes our brief tour of the mushroom people of Oaxaca, where I learned that what we know about their use of these sacred mushrooms is, at a minimum, profoundly superficial. And I'd be happy to take any questions or comments if anybody has any. Thank you for your attention. Anybody have questions or comments? Yes.
What's the difference between psilocin and psilocybin?
The question is, what's the difference between psilocin and psilocybin? Psilocybin is the pro-molecule that is converted in the body to psilocin. Psilocin is the active molecule that's converted in the liver to the active metabolite psilocin. There is.
They both create a hallucinogenic.
Yeah, they're profoundly active, and their mode of action is they essentially disrupt part of the brain that's called the default mode network, which those of you who are older, you remember the old switchboards where the operators sit there and plug the plugs in to connect the things. That's kind of what your default mode network is. It's an area in your brain where all the messages go and it gets prioritized and organized. The default mode network serves as an effective filter to keep the things in your brain at a level that you can function. The brain actually receives about 11 million messages a second, of which about 50,000 can be actively recognized and utilized by the brain. So there's a huge filtering function that's part of normal waking consciousness. The default mode network is a big part of that. And when you take that out, that then allows every part of your brain to communicate with every other part of your brain simultaneous. And one of the hallmarks for the conditions that seem to be effectively treated by these mushrooms were chemical psilocybin, which is what's been not largely at Johns Hopkins and some of the academic institutes. What it does is it allows for these different parts of the brain to communicate with one another, and the conditions that are effectively treated are ones in which you think of like cross-country skiing. You know, they plow those lines in the snow and you get your skis in and they stay in that rut, right? But if you think of depression or addiction or OCD, a lot of these things that respond to psilocybin, it allows people to get out of that rut and onto fresh snow, if you will. All right, that's it. We used the model, but that's essentially how those chemicals work. Any other questions or comments? Well, if not, thank you, Arno.
The screen.
Oh, sorry, what?
I run the screen, Mickey, from Colorado. Brian here.
Brian!
What a wonderful lecture, and it's so cool to hear the truth. And it must have been really hard to do this, knowing that someone was changing psychiatry today was so misaligned and so used and so abused. And she's a saint. And many of us who've looked at her work and researched her work, and I thank you for taking on such a difficult discussion. And in Colorado, of course, it's now known that we're going forward with the medicinal value of these sacred mushrooms. And I wish somehow we could also figure out how to give back to Oaxaca and the mushroom communities of the people there as we go forward, going into this therapy and all kinds of things. But if we could give 10% back to Mexico, it would really honor the Mexican people for what they taught us, and maybe try to do some reparations for what Wasson did, which of course is not as well known. And so it's very good that you brought this all up. I think I knew quite a bit about his betrayal and how he valued money over everything else when they didn't even know the value of money. So thank you, Nick. Wow, so glad to get to this lesson. Thanks for doing it again.
Well, Brian, thank you for your comments, and it truly is, it's heartbreaking stuff just to read about and put it together. You can kind of tell I sometimes have to kind of choke back tears because it's just so horrific. Now, along those lines, this is absolutely super minor stuff, but I've been working with family members in Oaxaca, some of Gloria's family lives in Oaxaca, to teach them mushroom cultivation, and we met with Celestino, their representative from those 12 communities. Took him to the laboratory that we set up in Oaxaca this last trip, and because our hope is that we will ultimately be able to grow gourmet edible mushrooms in that lab and teach those communities how to grow them again. At one point they were growing them, but the middleman was taking 70% of the money, and it just didn't pencil out for them. It wasn't worth their time. Celestino has bought a truck now for the purposes of taking produce from those communities into Oaxaca City. And so they now have a means by which they can deliver the mushrooms, and they still have some facilities in the communities around Ixtlac that could be, by Celestino's descriptions, reinvigorated to be able to grow mushrooms. They have a lot of things that, like corn stalk and agricultural waste, that we can't grow oyster mushrooms. And my hope is that through him and through the work that we're doing there, we will develop a relationship with those communities that ultimately will allow them then to be able to grow mushrooms both for their own use and to provide themselves a cash crop. That isn't the sort of reparations that I feel are, really appropriate in this particular case, but it's a step in the direction hitting them. So thank you for those comments, Brian.
Thank you, and thank you, Idaho Club, for this presentation. So important, so on the cusp of breakthroughs of helping all kinds of people. And, we move very slowly to change things that happened from Richard Nixon's time to today. And so proud of you all, Idaho Club, and thank you, Mickey, for your incredible generosity.
Well, thank you. Everybody calls you Uncle Brian. Thank you, Uncle Brian. I love you. And thank you for
Guess that's it. Nope. Thank you.